This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Discussions at the Roundtable. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today I'm excited to welcome John Hewitt to the show. Now, Mr. Hewitt is the founder of Hewitt Engineering, an industry-leading full-service consulting firm for the upstream oil and gas industries, which has been in operation since about 1990. Additionally, Mr. Hewitt maintains a robust expert witness practice with over 30 years of experience. Mr. Hewitt, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Let's jump into it. You started Hewitt Engineering back around 1990. How did you first get started in the oil industry? And also, how has the industry changed over the course of your tenure?
Well, the industry has evolved tremendously in the time that I've been in it. So I've been in the oil and gas business now for just a little short of 50 years. It sure seems like that's a long time when you say it out loud, but so I have degrees in mechanical engineering and in petroleum engineering.
Okay.
And I practice really only as a petroleum engineer. And I, at one point, decided that I was going to be a metallurgist, which is a materials guy in mechanical engineering.
Sure.
And then I got kind of hooked on petroleum, so that's how I got over on that side. And then I went to work for a oil and gas company, a Fortune 20 company, quite large company at the time. And that got me started.
In an ever-changing industry, you said that there's been a lot of changes over the years. How do you remain an expert? What does it mean to you and for your industry to be an expert? It's a pretty broad topic.
Well, it is. And so on the expert area, I'm in the upstream oil and gas, as you pointed out. So basically what we do is design completions and drilling for oil and gas wells and manage operations. So that has evolved tremendously. For about 18 years, I ran a contract drilling company and a bunch of oil and gas companies for a family that owned all that. And basically they were getting older, and so we were sold assets, and I worked my way out of a job because of that. So this company was started kind of by accident. I'm pretty well known in the industry, and the day after I stopped officing in the family offices, phone started ringing with people. Hey, I've got stuff I want. Can you do this? Can you do that? So a year later, I told my wife, I said, I guess we're in the consulting engineering business. I've been too busy to look for a job.
And I guess that's a pretty natural shift, right, into expert witnessing. You're already consulting on it. You've already shown yourself to be an expert. Did you start? You said your phone started ringing a lot. Was that just for consulting, or did that also include attorneys who wanted to bring you on as an expert?
Well, that really didn't start. I've always done a little expert work. First case I did was, I think, in 1980. And it was an attorney who was in the same building where we were and just needed some help on a matter. So I wound up helping him. And about a year or two later, I did another case for, actually, in that case, a friend of mine. And he was running a quite large company, and they had a pretty large piece of litigation. They need somebody to help manage the technical side of the litigation. So we had a number of experts, and I was kind of the lead expert for that. And then when I started this company, I've always done a little bit, but it was just a couple of cases, maybe a case every 8-9 months, maybe once a year or something.
Sure.
And then I was retained at the behest of a very, very large company who was involved in one of the largest pieces of commercial litigation in U.S. history. And they needed somebody to help them with that. And so I got involved there And because of the size of the case and because of the fact we got out with zero, they were sued for a very, very large number, many, many billions of dollars, and we got out with zero. Then the phone really started ringing for the
I
expert
bet.
side. So that kind of drove that, and it's taken on a life of its own, so to speak.
You talk about working with some of these large multinational companies. I know that you've done work with Pemex and other large multinationals across borders, across continents at times. What is that vetting process like? How well do you have to understand the legislative framework and all of the rules and regulations and everything of all the different places that these companies exist? How do you navigate all of that?
That is a slippery slope. So our little company, we've worked in more than 80 foreign countries.
Wow,
Again,
80.
word of mouth, yes. Word of mouth only. So people call us, and so we've worked in every place from most of the countries in Europe. We've worked in Italy and Bulgaria, Romania, worked in the North Sea, Scotland, England, onshore, offshore, and then we've worked in Africa, quite a few places, and we've worked in Australia, we've worked in Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, South America. But you do have to do your homework to be able to do that successfully. We're doing a lot of that is just engineering work, which is simpler. Sure. We also have done expert witness in a number of these countries. And each country has, different ways that they manage their judicial system.
Right.
Some of the cases that I've done internationally have been arbitrations, a couple of them. And so one that I did was in Vienna, Austria. And then I've done another one that was kind of on the other side of the world. But those are very, very similar to doing arbitration. Here you have an arbitrator. In this case, they were single arbitrators, both of them, and they were using international Chamber of Commerce rules. Sure. So they had the same rules, and those are rules that we use even here in the U.S. So there wasn't any change on those.
Is that largely the case where you kind of operate over a fairly similar framework, where you don't have to do too much additional research for a case that's international, or even in a part of this country of the United States that you don't necessarily know all the rules and regulations for, or is it the case that you have to do some pretty heavy footwork from time to time?
Well, the international ones are can be a little different, but as you point out, there are differences state to state.
Sure.
One that comes to mind is Louisiana uses Napoleonic law. It's the only place that does, and so it's a little quirky. But the law side is not really what people hire me for.
Sure.
But you do have to understand what you can do and what you can't do. And so that is a little bit different when you get in some of these environments. But that's when you need to get some counsel from the attorney that's retained you to make sure you're not doing something that would be inappropriate in that particular venue.
Let's talk a little bit about the vetting process. When you're first contacted by an attorney or an attorney's representative, what sorts of questions do they tend to ask you to see if you're a good fit? Or at this point, I'm sure that your reputation precedes, enough that they probably don't have to ask tons of questions, but maybe earlier on or in areas that you're not quite as familiar with, what sorts of questions do they ask? And how do you decide if you're a good fit for them?
Well, I view it, I really look at it from my side, what can I bring to the matter, to the case? And is it something that I'm interested in, or is it something I'm not interested in? If I'm not interested in it, I typically turn it down just because, it's not fun.
Sure.
And so if I'm interested in it, then I want to know. One of the first things I always ask in a preliminary call, which we do quite a number of those. In that preliminary call, I want to know if they have a scheduling order out. I want to know what does that look like. I rather prefer to get retained before there's even a scheduling order in the case, because I think I can aid the attorneys. The earlier they can retain, the better the outcome.
That's interesting. Do you turn down a significant number of engagements?
Probably 15%, maybe 20%.
Okay. So some, but not, not half.
No. And there's a variety of reasons. Sometimes time-wise, attorneys hate me saying this, but it's true. Some of them just don't plan. So they know they're going to use an expert, and they don't get me involved until they're really pretty far down the road. They've already taken depositions and that sort of thing. I think the mindset is, well, we can save some money maybe by not having that guy, have me working. But the disadvantage from their side is I could have really helped them during the deposition by framing questions for them, which I do very regularly. And quite often I listen in on depositions. I rather like to listen in rather than, sometimes I'm present, but if I'm not present and I listen in, I can feed them questions real time.
Sure.
In the position, which turns out to be really, really helpful, I think.
So you think that attorneys often aren't bringing on experts as early in the process as they should be to benefit their case. How proactive are you, and how proactive do you recommend that expert witnesses are with those sorts of things, with, helping an attorney, as you said, start out their case?
Well, and I tell them, once they decide to retain, one of the things that I try to really get through to them is, I'm here to help you, and not the other way around. And so there will be things that I have to rely on the attorney to give me information, and I would rather have too much information than not enough. Some attorneys will try to spoon feed information to experts because they, again, trying to keep the cost down. They don't want you reviewing things.
Sure.
But sometimes they don't know that something could be really valuable to someone like myself, particularly in an engineering matter. They'll not give you something, and then later you found out that it was been in the case a long time, quite a long time, and it would have really helped you write a report or whatever.
That's interesting. Let's dig into a couple of the things that you said. Some of that is part of preparation. The information that they give you at the outset, what you hear on those initial phone calls. What are the preparation techniques that work for you? Do you like, for example, mock cross-examinations or mock depositions? When they are first preparing you for a case, what are the things that help you as an expert be the most effective?
Well, prior to deposition, typically I kind of have an idea of what the other side is going to ask me, because I do both defense and plaintiff work.
Sure.
And so I have a pretty good idea what the other side's going to ask. I know what they don't like. Yeah. And so I take the don't likes and try to reduce that into questions that might be asked. And then I go over it typically with the attorney. And they have some areas that they think, because they've been listening to them in other depositions, so they have an idea of what they're going to, maybe ask me. So I like going over that in a kind of a more casual format, but go through it in depth, try to do a good job on the deposition. And then at trial, it's a little bit different. So because a lot of my testimony is technical, which is a real snooze for a jury,
Sure.
my job is to educate the jury on the technical matters. And so quite often I'll write a script for trial of questions for the attorney and give him the answers that I plan on giving, and
Okay.
Use that as a broad guideline for the attorney at trial.
That's interesting. I've heard of a lot of experts say kind of that the other is additionally true, where attorneys kind of give a script on occasion, especially for reporting, but sometimes kind of give a script to the experts, which of course has some ethical implications. And you had mentioned that sometimes attorneys, quote, try to spoon feed, right, information to the experts. How do you navigate that in such a way that you're not saying things that you don't actually believe or agree with, or implying something that you might not actually feel is true?
Well, if you were to talk to attorneys that I have worked with, they will tell you I'm a little stubborn on. I have my opinions, and they're my opinions. They're not the opinions of the attorney. And
Sure.
I told them that. I said, if you want to get up and testify, that's fine. But but you're paying me to do a job, and I'm going to not go out on a limb. The worst thing you can do as an expert, I think, one of the big pitfalls, is to let an attorney try to drive your testimony the way he would like to have it. And quite often that'll get you in trouble.
Do you have, any advice for attorneys in how they frame these things so that that's less of an issue?
I think from the attorneys, they and most of the guys I work with, the attorneys I work with, men and women, they work very closely with me, and that works out really well.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you get an attorney who just wants to be in charge, which is, a trial attorney by nature is a take charge sort of person. And,
Sure.
and they want to be in charge, which is fine, except they're not conversant in my area of expertise, and they really need to kind of leave that to my side. And I try to tell them that if I can get something in, I'll try to get it in, but there's a small window when testifying. And so I can't get too far afield or I get shut down. And I know
Sure.
that. So sometimes you have a window, particularly at trial, where you can volunteer a little something to kind of slip it in. And that really comes with a little experience. But most of the time you can't do that. So you don't want to be too cute to try to do that. That'll get you in trouble.
You had mentioned that a lot of the technical stuff can be a real snooze for the jury. Do you have any specific techniques or that you employ to kind of get around that, to make it either more digestible or more interesting for the jury?
Yes, I do. I use a lot of pictures, and I use animations, and I also use models. And sometimes I use actual equipment. So I've done a number of patent cases. I've got a couple of clients there. They've been pretty happy, one of them in particular, so they're kind of a steady client. But when you're doing a patent case, it's even more of a snooze. I mean, it's like compounding this problem. And so I like using models, and we just did one recently earlier this year that was quite involved, and I had cut the tools apart, so and then color coded them, painted them so they could see each component. And I like being able, another little trick that I use that is to try to get out of the box, the witness box, to get right in front of the jury. So if I have something like that, a demonstrative, and I can have it on a table in front of the jury, I can look them in the eye and be just a couple of feet from them. And that also really, really helps with bringing that home to them, where I can point out the different pieces in there and why something is one way or not the other way. So
Sure.
that works really well.
Do you have any stories for us where either, your role as an expert was either pivotal to the case or changed the way that you approach expert witnessing, for instance?
Yeah, I do. Like everybody has kind of quirky things that happen in the business. They're kind of funny. So one of the cases that I did quite some time ago was I was actually a fact witness and an expert witness. We had done some engineering work for a company. They wound up in litigation, so they retained us for the litigation also.
Sure.
So when I got deposed, the opposing counsel who was deposing me produced our engagement letter and said, well, you work for these guys? And I said, yes. Well, I guess technically you had engineering work for them, but anyway, so that went okay. He didn't examine anymore. So at trial, he said, the same attorney was examining me at trial, and he said, well, you're in fact are an employee of that company. And I said, no, I've never been an employee of the company. He said, yes, you were. I deposed you. I know who you are. And I've got this document. And he produced it and it gave it to me to read. He said, in fact, you are an employee. And I said, well, no, I'm a consultant. My company, we're a consultant. Have you read the document? And the jury started chuckling a little bit, and he got real frustrated. And so he cut his examination of me quite short. So that was kind of fun.
The lesson, I guess, to learn is make sure that you've read your documents thoroughly before presenting them to a jury.
And if you can get the jury kind of chuckling favorably on your side, you're making your point. So, And I had another one
Sure.
That was really another one is really fun. So I had testified. It was a 2-week trial, and I was on the plaintiff's side. So I testified, and I came back to Dallas. No need of I live in Dallas, so there was no need of hanging out anymore. So I got a call from the attorney a week or so later and said, can you be in trial? This is in federal court. Can you be in trial tomorrow morning? And I said, well, maybe, what do you need? Well, I want you to rebut their expert. What would their expert say? Well, he said something that was so preposterous. It was just unbelievable. So I said, sure. So in this particular case, I had built a model, and it was a model of a drilling rig. And I didn't build the whole thing because it didn't need the whole thing, just the parts that, to be able to explain the matter to the jury.
Sure.
So I get in there and I'm waiting and it's a trial to start. And the guy, his head almost comes off his shoulders when he sees me sitting there because he knew I hadn't been there. And so then I get up and I'm standing up by the model in front of the jury. And he said, well, this accident couldn't have happened. And you didn't build this model with all the other parts because you were trying to hide the fact this accident, it was impossible this accident could even happen. And in fact, the accident didn't happen. And I'm thinking, this guy was injured. And he was injured bad enough. He was care flighted by helicopter from the location to a hospital. They thought it was bad enough. Then they put him in a fixed wing and took him to yet another hospital who got him stabilized. And then they care flighted him to yet a really nice hospital for the particular injuries.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, well, all these doctors, what are they all crazy or what? That's running in my mind. So then he says, well, can you explain why you didn't build the rest of this model, the rig? it really took me kind of back. So I thought about it and I said, well, I just didn't think anybody would make such a stupid argument. The jury just cracked up. And that was the largest verdict in that particular state, by the way.
That's pretty good. It's like if there's a flat tire, you don't need a model of the entire automobile, right?
Correct. Yes.
Before we wrap up, I have a question that I ask all of my interviewees, and that is how important is winning to you? Is winnability a factor when you decide whether or not to accept an engagement?
Yes. I'm no different than that trial attorney I was talking about a moment ago. You know, they all have egos, and I guess I have an ego. I think I'm pretty good at what I do, and so I very much like to win. Yes.
Do you stay abreast of the progress of the case even after your specific part of the engagement is over? Do you see, do you keep in touch with the attorney and find out who wins? And I guess if it's important to you, then you must be checking up on
it. I almost always check up on the case to see how we did. Another thing that I do, which I think is beneficial to someone particularly somebody who hadn't done expert work very much, is to ask the attorney if they'll poll the jury if you're in a jury trial, of course, but to poll the jury and see how you did. So I want to know what I did. Win or lose, was my testimony believable and credible?
Oh, that's really interesting. And how is that feedback? In what form do you receive that feedback?
Well, they typically, most of the trials that I do, there's a jury consultant involved who typically does the polling, although sometimes it's the individual attorneys. But
sure.
Using another patent case as an example, it was we won the case and we won it kind of large, so we were very happy with it and polled the jury afterwards, and the attorneys were quite pleased because the jurors unanimously said, "Well, Mr. Hewitt won the case for you." So that makes me feel good when you get something like that,
I bet it also helps through word of mouth, through getting future engagements. You said earlier, I believe, that you don't advertise. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yes. Yeah. We get work primarily from word of mouth. Attorneys will call, and I always try to find out why they're calling. Particularly, you get these international things. I don't know where do they get us? I mean, we're a small company here in Texas, so. But anyway, they call, and so when they call, I try to figure that out. Sometimes they kind of don't want to tell you that, which is fine. But they obviously got your name somewhere, and once we get into a matter, sometimes they'll say, "Well, I talked to so and so, another attorney, and they really were happy with your work." So,
sure. I'd like to sneak in one last question about billing. Are you a project rate guy, or do you prefer to take a retainer? How do you prefer to bill?
Well, typically we do not take a retainer.
Okay.
We do occasionally take them if there's something that's sketchy, and that's my call, not one of my employees' call. So, but if it's somebody that we know, or a large law firm or something, typically we don't take a retainer. Retainer really doesn't help a whole lot. I mean, it shows good faith is about it, but it doesn't really help the matter any. So we do have an agreement, an engagement letter that we use. Attorneys, because they're attorneys, they like to use their own form some.
Sure.
And that's equally okay with us. We do have certain things that I particularly like to see in them. One of them that I didn't have until a few years ago is a provision in there. If you don't pay your bill timely, well, you're subject to interest and that sort of thing. Which helps, because then you can bludgeon them, and when the clock's running, at least you get paid. You may waive the interest, which I've done, but at least you get paid. So
Sure. Absolutely. Do you have any last advice for either experts and particularly newer experts or attorneys who use experts a lot?
yeah, this is a team sport. So you're part of a team and you need to work together. The expert should be helpful throughout the case to the attorney. And from an attorney side, in client side, it does cost money to win, but it doesn't make any difference whether it's plaintiff or defense side. I mean, if you're defense side, you get out with a zero, which we did in that multi-billion-dollar case.
Right.
They spent an awful lot of money getting there, but there still was a drop in the bucket compared to what it could have been. But that was because everybody was working together. And I do have regular clients that I've got a number of them that they don't, attorneys that don't take cases without running them by me individually. So they'll call me and say, hey, I'm thinking about taking this case. What do you think? And that works out well. Obviously, we're going to get to work if they decide, but I don't tell them to take it just so I can get, I don't need that. I
Sure.
want to, I don't need the work. But again, the object is to get the W at the end of the day. So.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hewitt, for joining me here today and all of the sage advice.
Well, I don't know how sage it is.
I'm confident that it was extremely sage, and thank you to all of our listeners for joining us here for another discussion at the Roundtable. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Discussions at Roundtable. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts or your favorite listening apps.